Conditions may apply. By CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 34. Papa's worried about his little green bean. Shota was worried. The kid was clearly hurting, but they wouldn't listen. It went against every instinct in his body to let them walk away, but he'd already messed up the trust between them enough. He told them the risks, and he needed to let them decide for themselves. Nothing major happened for the rest of the night, but Ivy's screams were still echoing in his mind. They were screaming loud enough to overrule their voice modulator, so it was higher pitched than their voice normally was, but it was guttural. It was the kind of scream that shreds your throat, and it couldn't have felt good to vomit right after that. They were a little wobbly on their feet for a moment, but they just walked it off like nothing happened. If the screams weren't concerning enough, then that surely was. He could blame it on adrenaline, but most people don't just get up after being in that much pain, regardless of whether the sensation lingers. Pain that powerful should be disorienting, and Ivy snapped themselves out of it with practiced ease. Can they just go one day without doing something incredibly concerning? Kami. When they bid each other farewell for the night, he shot a text to Hisashi, telling them that he'd be home late before making a stop at the precinct. He barged into Tsukashi's office without warning, but the man remained completely unfazed. He just looked up from his computer with a raised eyebrow. "Have you gotten any word on the perp that was sent to the hospital earlier?" he asked. It was too late, or rather too early, depending on how you looked at it, to be beating around the bush. "Yes, Nakano Takashi, 37 years old, prior record with narcotics. He's likely looking at a life sentence because of that." "Why do you ask?" Tsukashi asked. "What's his quirk?" He answered with another question. Tsukashi shuffled around some papers before responding, reading off the file. "Quirk, pain magnification. He can magnify the amount of pain someone feels in a certain range, but it's generally pretty weak, and the results vary based on the amount of pain the victim was already experiencing." "Now, are you going to answer my question?" Or Shota cut him off. "It's weak?" he asked, sounding unconvinced. "Yes, generally. As I said, it..." Shota cut him off again. "Did they find any quirk-enhancing drugs in his system?" he asked. "No, he was a little high off his own supply, but no quirk-enhancing drugs." "Can you please explain what's going on?" he asked, starting to get fed up with being interrupted. Shota ran his hands through his hair for a moment before taking a seat in front of Tsukashi's desk and letting out a groan. "The guy pinned Ivy and used his quirk on them, and they let out this awful scream. It was like they were getting tortured, but they wouldn't let me check them over. Kami, I knew something was wrong. They wouldn't be in that much pain if they weren't injured, would they?" he asked, not sounding hopeful for the answer. No, not unless we missed something on our end, but this guy's been processed a few times, so that would have had to be a repeated error on our part," Tsukashi replied with a cringe. "Damn," he bit out harshly before standing up to pace the room once again, running his fingers through his tangled curls. He knew he shouldn't have left them. He knew it in his gut, and he'd learned to trust his gut a long time ago. This whole situation was so frustrating, and he just wanted a clear course of action, but there was no right way to go about this. He could just offer up his life as the next ethics debate for his students. He couldn't take them off the streets. It may be good for their physical health, but from what little he knows about them, their mental health would suffer greatly. Not only that, but Uptown would suffer greatly. He had been scrambling for the last 6 days, trying to manage that place the way Ivy does so seamlessly. Until that gang was taken care of, that place and those people relied on Ivy taking them off the street would damn the rest of them. But leaving them wasn't any better. He still had no clue how old they were, and regardless of that, they were clearly not safe. They needed help, more help than he could give them. The situation was a ticking time bomb, and every little thing that went wrong would fall on his shoulders because he refused to take them off the streets. But if he did take them off the streets, whatever became of Ivy and Uptown would be his fault as well. Damn it to hell. Why did Tsukashi have to bring him into this? The man in question was watching him pace back and forth in front of his desk with a concerned expression. Okay, he offered as an end to the conversation and turned to leave. Wait! What are you going to do, Aizawa? He called after him. I have no idea, he responded before closing the door behind him. Hizashi was woken up by a text telling him that Sho would be home late and not to worry. So, of course, they were worried. They tried to get back to sleep because, rationally, he knew that he should listen to Sho. There was no logical situation he would be in where he had the time to send that message and not be fine. But the brain did what the brain wanted, so after a half hour of tossing and turning, they decided to go make some tea. Hopefully Sho would be back in time to share a cup with him before bed. Shota, in his impeccable timing, walked through the door just as they had finished preparing their tea and sat down. Rolling their eyes, but still relieved, he stood up again to make a second cup. Tea, Sho? He called down the hall as he set the kettle back on because they already knew the answer. Yeah, Zashi, that would be great. Did the text wake you? I told you not to worry, he said as he dropped his scarf and goggles around the back post of one of the dining room chairs. I know, but you know I never listened to you, dear, he replied with a tired smile. Sho returned the gesture and wrapped them in a hug, resting his head on their shoulder until the kettle went off. Thanks for the tea. I'm going to go change and wash off. I'll be back in a minute, he said with his face still smushed into the junction of their neck and shoulder. They planted a kiss on his head and pushed him away. All right, Sho. Tea should be the perfect temperature when you get back. Did something happen? He asked him before he left. Yeah, everything's fine, just worried about Ivy, he replied. So nothing new, he poked back with a smile. Sho let out a humorless laugh at that. I'll fill you in when I get back, he called over his shoulder as he disappeared into the bedroom. Sho had been worrying about his, quote, problem child since the night he met them. He had always had an attachment to strays, but usually that only applied to cats. Apparently, it applied to stray vigilantes, too. He'd been pulling his hair out, stressing about whether he should bring them in to keep them safe or risk them getting hurt in the time it took him to gain their trust. He'd kept telling them to wait, that they would come around, but he was removed from the situation. He didn't have to see all the red flags and will himself to ignore them in the hopes that things would turn around soon. He knew that, and Sho knew that too, but they both worried too much. No amount of logic or rationality would trump a chronic overthinker, but Kami did Sho try. They could hear him bustling around in the shower as he stirred some honey into his tea. It was lavender and chamomile, so, hopefully, it would help both of them get some sleep. He set the tea down at the head of the dining table and took his seat next to it. Maybe Sho did have good timing because his tea had just cooled down the perfect amount by the time he could finally take a sip. They were halfway through their cup when Sho walked out in a pair of sweatpants and a threadbare t-shirt. They sat there patiently as he took a moment to sip his tea before starting. We were splitting up a drug deal, and Ivy went after the dealer. I thought they had it handled, but I heard them yelp. I was taking the other guy down, and by the time I could look over, they were screaming. It was awful. He paused for a moment, staring into his teacup before looking up to meet his gaze. It was guttural, like they were being tortured. The guy had knocked them down and had a foot on their ribs, and I didn't know what was happening, so I activated my quirk on him, and they stopped screaming and stabbed him in the leg. He knocked himself out when he hit the ground, and I was already running to Ivy, but they put a hand up and dragged themselves away from me and puked. He knew Sho told him everything was fine, but he was becoming increasingly concerned the more he explained, and Sho looked uncomfortable just recounting it. By the time I got over there, they had their mask back on, and they were just lying down trying to catch their breath. I tried to look them over, but they wouldn't let me. They just said the guy had some kind of pain quirk, and they went to go make sure he was all right because, of course, they did. They wouldn't let the paramedics look them over, so I told them to wait a couple blocks away, but when I got there, they still wouldn't let me. I told them they could end up with a punctured lung if they ran around with broken ribs, but they said they knew what broken ribs feel like and that they weren't broken, he said, and took a sip of his tea. Well, I see how that's not ideal, but I think you'll just have to trust them when they say they didn't break anything, Sho. They replied, assuming that was the end of the story. No, that's not it, Zashi. I knew something was off. I knew I shouldn't have just let them go, he said as he rubbed his eyes with the heels of his palms before dragging his hands through his still damp hair. I stopped by the precinct to check in with Tsukashi about it. That's why I was late. And he said the guy's quirk only enhanced already existing pain, and it was weak. The amount of pain he can cause directly correlates to the amount of pain the person was already in. So for Ivy to have been in enough pain to vomit means that they had to have been injured, he said, finally finishing his explanation. Ah, yes, that made more sense. That was much more concerning. Damn it. How long did you patrol afterward? Did they seem all right then? He asked. Yeah, that's part of the problem, Zashi. They acted completely fine. They were a little shaky when they first got up, but otherwise, nothing. One second they're screaming in agony, the next they're making fun of me for acting like, quote, a worried housewife, he said as he carted his hand through his hair again. Kami, he really must be stressed. He only does that when he's in the thick of it. Slowly, they grabbed the hand fidgeting in his hair and held it gently. You're worried about how they can compartmentalize pain that well? He asked to verify. That, and whatever injury they were hiding, he confirmed. They both sat there in silence for a moment before Sho spoke up again. I have no clue what to do. There's no right way to deal with this, he said as he picked up his tea with the hand not currently being held. Yeah, Sho, I think you're right. There's no right way, but you're doing what you can. You're dealing with this as right as you can be. It's just a crap situation, he supplied. They wish they could say something else. They wish that they could fix this, and they knew Sho felt the same way. He was a bleeding heart, no matter how well he hid that fact from the world. Usually he did his best to stop himself from getting attached to begin with, but Ivy seemed to have weaseled their way through his rough exterior with ease. Hizashi also cared about the kid, but in a detached way, in the way he cared for anyone he'd never met. But he did care about Sho, and he could see the way this kid was going to break his heart if something went wrong. Kami, did they wish they could do something other than hope that things would work out? They couldn't bear to see Shota cry. We'll figure it out, Sho. Somehow we'll figure it out, he offered. Let's go to bed, okay? Shota took a few more sips of his tea before nodding, taking both their cups, setting them in the sink, and following him to bed. End of chapter.